So my guidance counselor suggested that I do a co-op. So it landed me in a grade 3 classroom, and I cannot describe it other than I just felt exactly where I was supposed to be. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I would love to see changed is that our system of school has to start to make some really big changes to focus on learning at a very deep and authentic level. And that means it's going to have to look different than it has.
Tracy, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, it is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on as one of your guests.
Yeah, you've got great experience, industry, schools, the whole thing. I'm really excited to get those insights out of you, Tracy. So selfishly, and for the listeners, hopefully there's some cool things that we can learn from Tracy today. You could share some of your secrets to success, and we could help our future educators get to the positions they desire to be at. But I'm going to kick off with our first most consistent question about your childhood experiences. So I selfishly love learning about people's childhood because I felt like, mine had a role to do in terms of how I act today or what I've become today. I would love to learn a little bit about your childhood. So could you take us back? What would your parents say about you? What would your teachers have said about you? How would you describe yourself as a kid?
I think, my parents and teachers all would have said that I was very quiet, very watchful, but, had a very small, close group of friends. I wasn't a student that had, like a huge friend group. And it took me a while to come out of my shell. I wouldn't say probably till around high school, and I did theater. It wasn't until that I started being involved in plays that I started to be more comfortable with being outgoing. So I would say for the most part of my childhood, most people would have described me as quite quiet.
Going straight to plays is a crazy way to come out of the shell, Tracy, but it's straight to the crowd. What's your favorite play? What's one that you remember fondly?
Oh, I think my favorite play that I was in was The Diviners. So it's a drama, takes place in like a small, like Midwestern town. It has some comedy to it, but mostly it's a tragedy.
Okay, interesting. And do you still do it on the side, or is mostly a past sort of childhood thing?
I go to the theater, but I am no longer someone who takes stage in that way. Though I would say, I do think being a teacher and an educator has a lot to do with being comfortable with being in front of people, creating engaging experiences, whether it's planned, so you're following kind of a script with your lesson plan, or if you're improving and something happens in your class and you take advantage of it and you run with it. So I do see connection there, though I'm not. You're not going to find me on stage coming near you.
No, I absolutely. And I like to even think that sometimes teachers are just actors that know some content. We were doing a negotiation thing, and we had the teacher being taken hostage, and I would say the teacher acted better than any of us. And I'm like, wow, okay, I didn't see that coming, but they acted like they were kidnapped, and they had this whole thing going on, and I've never seen such great performance. That's lovely. And did you ever think that you would end up in education based, on you were growing up? Were your parents or your family in education? How did that happen?
No, I was convinced pretty much from a really small age I was going to be a marine biologist. I had wallpaper that was fish and seashells and like everything. I was obsessed with the ocean. And it was my final year of high school. My high school had a co-op program, and I had lots of credits. I kind of was feeling over being in school, definitely had some senioritis. And so my guidance counselor suggested that I do a co-op. So it landed me in a grade 3 classroom. Teaching was not anything that had been on my radar. And I cannot describe it other than I just felt exactly where I was supposed to be. And I had about 2.5 weeks to change all of my university applications from biology to an education major. And so that was a little bit stressful, but yeah, it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, yeah. I always feel like we remember our first experience teaching, and I always feel that education is a very passion-driven industry. We don't have people that don't want to be here. It's more like if you absolutely love it, you're here or you're not. There's nothing in the middle. And you could sense that from every single person that you talk to, and everyone has such a special story. I fell into it by mistake as well. My mom would take me to these places to teach. Growing up in Uganda, she'd basically say, okay, go and teach. And I absolutely loved it. And it wasn't something that I planned or thought of ever doing, but it's one of those things that, we're blessed that it happened to us, I guess, in our lives. And now you're at HTS,
Mm.
right? You're doing some incredible work over there.
Oh, thank you.
I'd love to know, what was your first day like at HTS? What was that? Can you tell us what that first day was like for you?
Yeah, so I didn't start at a traditional time of year. I started in May. So the school year was in full swing. My first day, so there's three times a year, Holy Trinity is an Anglican affiliate school. And so there's three times a year where we have like extended communion chapels. So my first morning was on one of these extended communion chapels. But so it took me a little while just to figure out, okay, what's going on? Where's my office? Uh, how do I navigate this space? But I would say the biggest thing that stood out was all day I had people coming up to me, introducing themselves if we hadn't met when I was there for the in-person interview, and just really making sure that they offered help, that I knew where I could find them. And I was blown away by the very clear community that I had just joined.
Yeah. Am I allowed to ask what an interview looks like with a large school like HTS?
Yeah, it's changed. I mean, I've been there 12 years now. It's changed a few times. This was for I was interviewing for the academic director position, and it was the first time this position had existed at the school.
Hmm.
And so it was, down to four of us. We all
Right.
were at the school together, so we saw each other. And it was a series of interviews with the different division heads, with teachers, with students, and then it was, like a full panel presentation, and it was all day. I got there at
Wow.
8 o'clock. I left around 3:45. So but it was a really neat experience because I left really knowing that I wanted that job and I wanted to be there and
Mm.
just, driving out with my fingers crossed, and everything worked out. I'd never been in an interview like that, before in my life.
Yeah. Well, at least good thing is you walked out with the job more or less, right? So
Yeah.
that's great. That's the best outcome that could have happened.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Um, and you have worked both at independent schools and international school settings as well. I think you were in Istanbul,
Yeah.
if I'm not wrong. Um, can you tell us a little bit about what that was like? And then, love to know a little bit of, if there's any learnings you took from that international education, bringing it to HTS, or if there's anything that you feel like within Canada we can learn something from some place like Istanbul. Is there something that stood out there that we don't see over here commonly? Love to
Mhm.
hear about that experience of yours.
Sure. So, yeah, teaching internationally was an experience I knew I wanted. I wanted to go to a place that was a bit more off the beaten path. I think a lot of international educators, especially I went to Istanbul when I was in my 20s. And I think
Mm,
a lot of, those first steps are, people think kind of the Asian countries, and it makes sense because there's so many international schools there. But I wanted to try for something a bit different, just to have a slightly different experience. And Istanbul kind of fell into my lap. I was working with someone who was from Istanbul who had connections at a really, really top school there, got an interview, and, got the job. So living in Istanbul was an experience unlike anything I've ever had. And I think it was one of the first times that I really realized the importance of being able to put aside your own perspectives and expectations
mm,
when you walk into a place. At first, there were things that looked very, very similar. And the more I opened myself up to what the education experience was like there, the cultural experience, just being able to see how many things remained similar and the things that were different, and why they were different. It definitely shaped, coming back then to teach in Canada, it definitely shaped just I think my positionality on being open, being more open
mm,
minded, understanding that there are multiple perspectives that are not my own. And I need to always be mindful that I'm remembering that so that I'm not making assumptions. So I think that was probably the biggest thing that I took away. And I think any time in any teacher's career that they get to teach internationally, you should take that opportunity. It doesn't just have to be when you're just graduated in your 20s. It could be any time in your career, but it was an amazing, amazing experience. I think from some of my other independent schools, because they were all very small. So
mm,
HTS is the first really like big school that I've worked at. And I'm very grateful for those experiences because when you are in a very small school and you have limited resources, you really have to be creative with how you still get that same experience for your students. And there were schools that, I worked at for a while, it was grades 9 through 12, didn't have a guidance counselor. So I just decided to learn how to be the guidance counselor. And I think being able to take those opportunities provided a very, very quick learning curve that definitely helped me step into leadership earlier in my career. But just being able to see those opportunities, step into them, not hesitate, learn from them. I think for me was probably one of the biggest things that I am thankful for in my early career.
Yeah. No, I mean it's one of those things where when you get outside your comfort zone, you experience growth that you've never experienced before,
Mhm.
especially if you're proactive about taking that growth opportunity and just saying, you know what, I'm gonna do it. And you put your hand up and you're like, you know what, that this is just what I'm going to do, and I'm gonna take this on. What was the most unexpected thing in Istanbul?
Trying to think back, I think for me the it was the sheer volume of people.
Mm,
So I grew up in a very small town, like very, very small town. And I had lived in Toronto at this point for about 3 years. But, I grew up like when I first moved to Toronto, it was in like the High Park area. So like lots of green space.
mhm,
Obviously, Toronto has a lot of people, but I had never experienced the crowds and just the sheer volume of people everywhere you went. I remember the first time getting onto the metro or their subway, just completely overwhelmed.
yeah.
And, I didn't even get on the train because I was so nervous of how am I even going to fit in that train car? And so
Right.
I was not prepared for that. I had never experienced anything like it. Yeah, I think that was the biggest one. The other thing that was unexpected, but I loved. So by the neighborhood that I lived in, I found out after a few weeks living there had one of the more famous call to prayers, where his voice was absolutely beautiful.
Mhm,
And every afternoon when it was, time for the call to prayers, I could hear it, and it was not anything that I was accustomed to hearing, but it was so beautiful. And when I left, I missed it. It was one of the things that I missed the
mhm.
most, hearing that every day.
Wow. No, it's very nice. I mean, every country is so different, and then you get to experience all these really interesting things and learn from them. I think that
Mhm.
is very cool. Was there a specific moment in your career, or even in your, before you started working, that you felt has really defined your life today or your position today? Is there something that you always remember fondly that says, "I am here because I did that," or "I'm here, I remember that so fondly"?
It's hard to think of one moment. I think that at the school I was at before I was hired at Holy Trinity School, I started there covering maternity leave for a guidance counselor, only possible because I had taught myself how to be a counselor at my
Yeah.
previous school. Uh, and it was a really small, private school, high school. I had some boarding, and they didn't have, it was the head of school, and then that was it. It was very lean for administration. And my maternity leave cover was coming to an end, and the principal sat me down and she said, you know, I don't want to lose you. I can't keep you on as a guidance counselor because the woman is coming back. But how would you feel about staying on in, they called it an academic dean role?
Mm,
And I was a bit floored in that moment because for someone to take the time and kind of create a job for you was very humbling.
mhm,
And I think it also made me stop and pause and say, "Okay, this person obviously sees something in me because, it's not just realizing as a head of school you need more help. They could have posted for it after I left and it could have had nothing to do with me." But I think in that moment, her
mhm,
taking the time, assessing the strengths that she saw in me that I could bring to help the school, to help the organization. It was shortly after that that I started looking into well, what would I need to do to pursue this? So, getting my principal qualifications. I didn't have my master's at the time. So, finding a master's program that was challenging and interesting, but also flexible because not working wasn't an option either. And
Yeah.
it was really at that moment that the thoughts of education leadership had always kind of been there ever since I started teaching. But it really was in that moment, her seeing something that started me down the journey of figuring everything else out. So yeah, I would say that is probably one of the more pivotal moments for me.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's I love when you say that because there's certain individuals, leaders that see something in you before you
Hmm.
see it in yourself, and I think those individuals play such an important role and everyone has those. We might not notice them now, but there's certain leaders that will believe in you more than sometimes you believe in yourself, and say, you know what, this person can do this, and this person will be really good at this, but they're just not getting the opportunity to do that. So
Hmm.
I think that it's incredible that sort of leadership is something that you've also got to experience, which is very nice. Um, and speaking of your role today, deputy head, Holy Trinity School, you focus a lot on, personalized teaching, personalized learning.
Hmm.
Now, I've heard that probably for the last 20 years. Everything is personalized at this point. But what is your definition of, can you give me like tactical? Like, what do we mean? Because if we're in a group of 30, class of 30 kids, we're not going to teach every kid separately, right? It doesn't make sense. But what is personalized learning to you and what does it actually look like?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think some people get personalized and individualized very, they think they're the same and they're not. To your point, if you have a class of 30 kids, you're not teaching 30 different lessons 30 different ways. For me, and I think this my definition has a lot to do with the 12 years that I've spent at HTS and the work that I've been fortunate to do there. But when I think of personalized, it is that the learner is central, and so whoever is in front of you, you are taking that time to build that relationship. You are bringing them in to the design of that learning, and you are ensuring that there's the relationship, the experiences, the sense of self, because all of those things are going to be unique, and it's going to mean the person's going to show up to learning in a bit of a different way. It's not a switch, right? Personalized learning is not like, and now we're turning personalization on. It takes a lot of work and um it's something that also never stops evolving. And I think that's an important thing to highlight because the learners that are coming into our classrooms year after year are different and they're evolving. The society that we are educating in year after year is different and evolving. And so it is not something that I believe you can ever check. Okay, we have mastered personalized learning. It's done. As an educator, you can definitely check off that you are building strong strategies of how to personalize. But for me, it is something that is always evolving or should be always evolving.
Mhm.
The moment it stops being a learner centered approach, and then it's not a personalized approach.
Right. And for teachers that might be listening to this that are thinking that they want to try and take a positive step
Mhm.
towards maybe having a better experience for their kids in the classroom, are there certain tactics and strategies that you've seen have worked well or a good starting point for teachers that are trying to consciously take that effort?
Yeah, I would say the first thing, the most important thing is how you are establishing relationships and trust in your classroom. Because you
Mm,
have to be able to know and understand the learners in front of you. And that will not happen if you are, not taking those small moments, even standing by the door as your students walk in, the few minutes as they all get settled, just to walk around, say hello, ask questions. Those are all really, really important things because without that strong relationship, you are not you're not creating trust, you're not creating an environment where students will take risks and show more of themselves to you. And so you will never learn all that you can about the best ways to reach them. So I would say that is first. After that, I think one of the biggest things is how do you take small steps into bringing their voice into your classroom? So in Ontario, we're really lucky. We have Growing Success, which asks us to, co-construct success criteria, which means we are having those conversations with students about what quality looks like and making it really transparent so that they have a clear understanding of that learning target, how they can show it. It also means that they can have some agency if they really know what you are wanting them to demonstrate that connects to your curriculum. They often can be part of designing what that process looks like. And so I think that's a really, I've seen the biggest skeptics of that. Like, how would a student be able to design a lesson or a unit or an assignment with me? And when they lean into it and they try and they get support, they are blown away of the experience. Students are more engaged because they feel some ownership. They're like, this is my process, this is my learning. And the outcomes, like what the student does to demonstrate their learning, is always um, much, much better and done at a deeper level of learning. And so it can feel a bit risky for some educators, I think, because it does mean you have to give over some control of your classroom, and that can be uncomfortable if you've never done it.
Mhm.
But it is worth it. It is 1,000,000% worth it. So I would say those are the two big things. Really focus on relationships and start to investigate some small ways that can lead to bigger ways of bringing your students' voice into your classroom design.
Yeah, and when you've seen it in practice, students engaging and trying to sort of help co-create, if I may use that, what the design of the session looks like. Does that happen like before the semester start? Does that happen like 10 minutes, the first 10 minutes of the class? Does that happen like, sorry, I'm getting really tactical here because I want to try it
Yeah,
out, but I want to know how. Does that
yeah.
happen, at the end of the semester for the next semester? When do we do that and how do we do it?
So I think it depends. I've definitely used it, and I've sat in on classrooms where we first do that at the start of a new like learning cycle or what you may call
Mm,
like a unit. So we're going into this unit, we're studying these things, and here's what you are going to be responsible to demonstrate at the end of whatever time period. Could be a couple weeks, could be longer, could be a couple classes. And so walking your students through that. If you have an exemplar, that helps, but sometimes you don't because it's the first time you are doing something. You're trying something new, so you may not have something to show them. But walking them through the idea of quality, right? So teachers are used to having rubrics, and it's very challenging for students to understand. So and so showed thorough detail. What does thorough mean? What's your definition? What's their understanding of that? And so, even taking those words that we all use and breaking them down with students, what does that mean? What does that look like?
mm,
And also coming back to it as they progress through the learning. Do we still think this is the right way to think about it? As you've learned new things, has your understanding grown and changed? And, I think those key pieces are really important. I did sit in on an amazing class where the teacher co-constructed an entire unit with her class, and it was a grade 12 law class. So the stakes are high, and it's not a class that, typically students take who aren't very serious and aren't at least thinking about maybe this is something I want to investigate. And she used a protocol, gave everything in that unit that she was hoping to accomplish, and the students worked through this activity. It took about a class and a half, and then in real time in front, they designed the whole unit together, and it involved guest speakers and it involved like case studies and all of these things. Now, she was able to do that at that level. Sure, you can say grade 12 students, but those students had also been through smaller opportunities to co construct and different experiences where they could have a say in what their learning looked like. So they also were able to come to that conversation very prepared. She did the unit. It was by far, when she did her teacher survey at the end of the year for feedback, that was the class's favorite unit. It also was where their average was the highest. And so I don't think that's a coincidence.
yeah, well, I love that because I like it's a very subtle point of feeling that you have ownership over this that you've created. And so we would have a natural tendency to invest more in that experience because we have created this. We asked for the guest speaker, right? So if we don't engage, but we asked for it, right? And we asked for this and we said that we'll do a case study. So there's a little bit more ownership over there. And, I mean, maybe if you give it to a group of grade sevens, they'll say no homeworks, no exams, let's just have fun. And then they'll see the outcome from there. But I think the next time it's happening, maybe we'll try and get an invite out of you to see that. But that is
Absolutely.
wonderful to hear.
But to your point in the grade 7, so I taught in middle school for of my career that I didn't.
Hmm.
Grade 7 and 8, mostly grade 8, and I would still do co-constructing activities,
Hmm.
with them, and they are excellent. The parameters have to be, a little bit different. So when I did it with my grade 8s, it was very clear on what we were trying to get to, the curriculum pieces, what I wanted them to demonstrate, but we also took time to talk about the skills and competencies that I wanted to see from them. And so they were able to bring that into the conversation. But they loved it because middle schoolers don't often get a chance to be in charge, especially grade 8s. They are, turning 13. They are seeing spaces in their life where they're given more responsibility, but not given all of the connected freedom to it yet because they're still quite
Hmm.
young. And so anytime that they felt that that the reins are being handed over to them, they ate it up. They loved it.
I love that. Yeah. No, definitely something for me to try out as well. I am very curious to see how it works. So I'll definitely give it a shot. I love that.
Absolutely.
Um, in your view, what is one misconception that you think a lot of people have, about education, and you wish more people understood correctly?
Hmm. I probably would have said something different a few years ago, but I think
Mm.
what I'm seeing now is that the misconception around education really is connected to the traditional system that we in many ways still have. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of adults out in the world who are very successful, who did school well, or maybe they didn't, but the system that they went through, for better or for worse, they've turned out well. They are successful, they have great jobs, they own houses, they have families, and they understand that system. And I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that I would love to see changed is that our system of school has to start to make some really big changes to focus on learning at a very deep and authentic level. And that means it's going to have to look different than it has. And that's okay. That doesn't mean we are ruining education. It doesn't mean that we are, taking away some of the things that we know students of all ages need, but it can't look the same that it has, right? There's been a lot of growth. Like you say, been hearing about personalization for 20 years. Some of the biggest kind of blockers of truly personalized education coming into existence in our schools is, things like our fixed timetables, our fixed days, our you know uh, grades that are set up by a certain age, not
Hmm.
skill and ability. So there's a lot of things that are still in place from a different time for different needs of society than what we are currently and rapidly evolving into. And so I think that's the one misconception, I think, is that the system really needs to change in order for it to continue to serve the learners that need it the most.
Yeah. No, I'll side with you on that, right? And I think there's definitely, change is scary and it's not
Mhm.
easy. It's definitely much harder than I think people think it is. I think people, especially in education, I think people think maybe it's sort of a overnight, and I think usually the blame falls on people that are trying to make the change, but
Mhm.
have constraints placed on them that they're trying to work with. So sometimes it's interesting to see that we expect things really quickly, but change is scary. Change takes time, and I think in an industry like education, change is sensitive, and that's what people don't realize, that it isn't like a usual change, right? It's to do with kids, it's to do with our future, right? So everything that we touch over there is more sensitive than something else that we could be touching. And so changing that could have a fundamentally positive impact, but could also have a negative impact. And so it's a lot more sensitive to that.
Mhm. I
Um,
would also say not changing it also has an impact
exactly.
as well.
Absolutely. And in your experience in designing a lot of curriculums. What is something that is really exciting to you? Like when you look to the future, is it something about the way that you're designing, even if it's classrooms, even if it's timetables,
Mhm.
even if it's curriculums? What is something that's really got you excited about the future of education?
Yeah, it's that's it's funny. I look at a lot of the patterns and trends that are happening right now, and they are things that, we have been having these conversations about at HTS for over 10 years. So things like competency-based learning, micro-credentialing,
Hmm.
all of those things are things that we have been researching, testing out, piloting, and yeah, there's still also the things that I'm most excited about. So we've been doing a lot of work around our 6 competencies that, we hold really important, that we've had since 2018, mapping them out into continuums so that we can get to a place that we can bring them into our everyday experience and have a common language. When we're talking about sensitive things like character, we want to make sure that we are all talking about it in the same way, right? Same with creativity, which a lot of people feel like, well, how can you measure creativity? So building some of those things has been a very long process because it's iterative. But what I think it will allow us to do is that as things open up in the space of competency based learning, we will actually be positioned really, really well because we have done an extensive amount of research and legwork to come to that in a very intentional way that aligns with our overall philosophy of what education should be. So I'm very excited about that. We're also, I think, some of the big things I'm excited about. We are in the midst of our first internship program. Next year will be the first graduating class that's gone through the full 9 through 12 cycle. So, and that program itself is also like we're learning from it as we are creating it. And so we've been able to go back and look at our 9-10 program and really make some subtle but necessary changes to make that whole experience a more connected one. And yeah, we're also working on a capstone project, looking at how we arrange our mentors and with our students and our teachers. And that to me really speaks to the importance of relationship and how that is going to grow even more important as we come into times of higher AI involvement in education. But at the same time, I'm also excited about what we're seeing in AI. It's it's a delicate balance, I think. But what I hope, what I hope is that I'm already seeing that it is something that will be able to help us break through some of the barriers that exist when it comes to designing personalized learning. And if we do this right, then it will give teachers more time to focus on the human interactions and the
Mm,
authentic applications of learning. But we have a lot of work to do in this space around supporting our educators because it is there, as with anything, some educators are very excited, and for some, this is going to be a challenging shift and one that I think also comes with some feelings of grief and loss. And so I think we have to support those teachers who are excited about it and give them the runway and the space and the ethical guidance on how they can start to play with it and bring it into their learning. We also have to look at those incredible teachers who haven't really come to fully agree with AI yet, but who have so much to provide to the design space and using AI. And how do we help them kind of navigate through what that changing role in teacher needs to look like? So, yeah, I'm excited for all of those things. Though I think educational leaders just really have to, as much as you can't slow down because AI is moving so fast, but just really look at what it means for the landscape of all your teachers and how are you supporting that? Because I do think the potential that it has could be pretty remarkable for both our teachers and our students.
yeah, no, 100. I 100% agree with you. I've been in two different spaces. Some teachers are like, "Let's go, let's do it." Like, I'm ready to go, and some are like, "Please, no, I am not for this, not for me." And
Yeah.
so I think the mindset of being able to support both those sides and just being able to have that process where everybody adopts it in a way that makes sense to them. And because at the end of the day, the one thing that I believe in is that all the teachers, at least, everybody cares for the students, and that is what
Mhm.
I think grounds everybody and brings everyone together. So how do we, carve out different types of value for different types of teachers depending on what they're looking for their students? And I think that adoption is something that will come with time as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, taking a moment and understanding the reaction of, like, as you said, "Please, no." Where is it coming from? It's probably coming from a space of fear, of loss, and so what is that connected to? And how do we help them bring what is most important about why they became a teacher, why they teach the subject they do, why they, continue to pursue uh,
Mm,
excellence, and bring that into this AI space, because the truth is that the educators right now are the ones who are at the early stages of designing what this relationship with AI is going to look like, and what we start to keep in our classroom and in our teaching, and what we start to let go of, and how that changes our assessment practices, and how that changes how we ask students to demonstrate their learning, the relationships that we can continue to cultivate. That's now. We are doing that right now. And
yeah.
I don't think I actually think that's really cool. Um, but it also can be overwhelming for some. But I do see it as a really beautiful opportunity to help those teachers who are struggling with, what does AI mean to me as, an arts teacher, as an English teacher, as a music teacher, whatever. What does AI mean to me? I think if you frame it in what's most important and what do you want to hold on to, that can help, right? Because everyone has things that they are okay letting go. You just have to walk them through that space.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think that's a very, very nice way to put it. Um, I'm going to shift gears here into our rapid fire round. So I will throw you a question and then you could give me a response in under a minute or so. So the first question I have for you is, what is one thing you have recently changed your mind on?
How much gear I want to carry on an overnight hiking trip?
Well, did you carry too much or too little?
No, it was this past summer. I took my first multi-day hiking trip, and it was in the Dolomites, so the Italian Alps, and they have a hut,
Yeah.
like a hut system, where
Yeah.
so you don't have to carry a tent or your sleeping bag, or like they cook you dinner and breakfast. So there's a lot you don't have to carry, and it was
Right.
great. It was great.
Okay. Very nice. I think the less you carry, the better, but you still get to enjoy the experience of it, right?
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
I love that. What is one part of your daily routine that you can't skip?
My morning workout.
Okay, very nice. Uh, what's your favorite subject in school when you were growing up?
It was anything connected to the arts, and mostly visual art and theater.
Okay, what about least favorite? I will not send this to your teacher. Don't worry about it.
You know what? I'll say this. I Math was really hard for me, and I
Mhm.
didn't have a math teacher who really took the time to help me understand math until I was in grade 11. And he completely changed how I thought about math.
Mm,
So math was my probably least favorite, but the moment that I had someone who was willing to work with me and I got it, it it changed everything.
yeah, and I love that because it shows people how one teacher can change so much for a
Yeah.
kid. I never used to like, I had this law class in when I was at undergrad, and I was not ready for it because I looked at the textbook size, and I went into that class, and I could say that was probably one of the best ones I did in 4 years of undergrad, and it was because just because of the teaching,
Mhm.
and I feel like it could have been the exact opposite should it have been someone else, and it is just incredible the impact one person can have on such a large group of kids. I love that. Um, if you could implement one change across the entire education system overnight, what would it be?
No grades.
No grades? Okay. How do you assess the kids?
Well, you still assess them. I think that's why I'm so excited about what's happening with competency-based learning. I obviously students have to have grades. It's how their university entrances are decided and all of that. But if I could change one thing, it would be that we would have much deeper ways of assessing
Mm,
other than just here is your 88%.
mm. I love that. Different factors into the assessment of a
Yeah.
child's.
And those factors would be accepted. Obviously,
Mm,
if just for a school to walk away from grades, that's not feasible. But if the whole system changed,
mm.
which, you said education system, so the whole
Absolutely.
system,
Yeah.
it would be that. We'd
No,
be
I love
more,
that.
yeah, we'd be more competency and portfolio based, and universities would accept it as well.
Lovely. Love that. And if you could swap jobs with anyone for a day, who would it be?
I don't have a singular person, but I think any astronaut. I
Okay.
would I I feel that seeing the Earth from space would
Mm,
actually be life-changing and would really make a difference in the choices that you would make when you were back.
interesting. Well, yeah, if you got a couple million lying around, I'm sure Elon Musk could send you there on his trip. But all we need is a couple $1 million, I guess,
Yeah,
for
no
a
big
round trip.
deal, no big deal.
Yeah. No, that's good. And what is one educational tool or technology that you swear by?
So this is a bit revealing for me, but I have used Grammarly Pro for about I don't know since it came out a while now, and it's not the most flashy tool, but I am very grateful for it. I rely on it. It just helps me slow down. I tend to grow very quickly, especially when I'm writing. And so it just helps me slow down, helps me think about the language I want to use and be a bit more intentional in my communications.
Very nice. Grammarly Pro is one that just rings in my bell every time I think of a YouTube ad. It
It
rings in
works.
my bell nonstop. Yeah, it works. I'll tell you that. They did a good job in making me remember what it is. No, great. All right. So that's it for the rapid fire round. Now we're going to move on to the final question. So I have a
Mhm.
question here from a past guest that we have had on the podcast. And then we'll ask you to leave a question for our upcoming guests as well. So this question is from Grace, the head of school at Branksome Hall. And her question is, what is the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Like in my life, in my career, just the worst advice.
Worst advice. Grace went straight for the worst. Nothing to do with the best.
Um, I was getting ready to go to Istanbul and I had someone say to me, are you sure, you really shouldn't be doing this. Are you sure? You are going to miss so much in, the year that you're gone. You're going to miss so much. Are you sure? They really didn't think that I should go. That was their advice. I shouldn't go. I, you know, and I did. There were things that were happening in my family and then with friends that I wasn't there for. But I would say taking that risk and having that experience, there wasn't anyone who stopped being my friend because I was not in the same city as
Mm,
them for a year. But the experiences that I had and what I learned about myself at that age, I don't think could have been replicated and anywhere else. So, yeah, that was the worst advice was not to go because I would miss parties and I would miss things with friends.
yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I think sometimes maybe in people don't completely understand individuals in terms of decision making or in terms of why we do the things that we do, and sometimes it's hard for others to understand that the sacrifices or what we do. But to your point, if they're real friends and if they're good friends, they'll be around when you're back. They're not going to disappear anywhere, and they'll celebrate their birthday again next year, right? So, no, I've really enjoyed this, Tracy. This has been so fun for me.
Oh,
Thank you
me
so much
too.
for being such a lovely guest on our podcast. You've shared some really incredible insights about learning, about education, about approaching the classroom. And so I'm sure that a lot of listeners will get great value out of this. So thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you so much for having me. This was the time flew by. This was a blast.